Hey everybody, welcome back. Tack för sist, välkommen tillbaka. So listen, I did a video 2, 3, 4 days ago. I don't remember, just in the last few days, talking about what I think is one of the most hurtful things the Mormon Church teaches. And I've gotten comments in support. I've gotten quite a few pushing back. And I want to clarify what I'm talking about because several of you have said that is not doctrine of the church. That's not what the Mormon Church teaches. I never said it was the doctrine of the church. But if something is pushed enough all over the place, it de facto becomes doctrine. At that point, you can't separate it. Now, this is not some isolated case. By the way, if you're not familiar, let me just sum up a little bit what I talked about. There's this saying, and I know it's a Bible verse. I understand that. Remember that my knowledge all comes from at least 20 years ago. I've been out of the Mormon Church for a long time, but I was very into not being a member, but the doctrine of it. I studied a lot of scripture. I read a lot of books. Not saying I was an expert, but I was well versed. I wasn't some, naive, know-nothing person when it came to the doctrine of the church and the scriptures. I was very well versed in them. I know it's a Bible verse. I understand that. I was talking about how my dad felt a lot of guilt for many years that so many of his kids left the church because they were taught if you raise them up right, they will, basically stay the course. I know it's not the doctrine of the church. There's lots of things that aren't doctrine of the church, but are pushed pretty heavily. Back when I was younger, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper was frowned on big time. It's obviously not in the word of wisdom. There's nothing about that. There was no soda back then, at least not the form we have today. But people pushed that hard, and I had to sneak Cokes and Pepsis and Mountain Dews. I couldn't just drink them openly in front of my dad. I would have gotten in trouble. And that was not, by the way, I'm at work, covered with paint. I was reading some of your comments, and I was like, I want to talk about this while it's fresh in my head, while some of the comments are fresh in my head. By the way, thank you very much for commenting. Whether you agree or disagree with me, I appreciate it more than I can say. I thank you so much for subscribing, watching, listening, and especially for sharing the video. If there's something that I say that you find interesting or just thought-provoking, I'd love it if you share it. And I really do try to keep things uplifting and positive. There are times where I'm going to go into subjects where it's a little bit deeper, a little bit darker. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm not attacking the church. There's a couple of people that comment on quite a few of my videos that consistently call the Mormon Church a cult. I do not believe that. There are so many good things about the LDS faith. I have some regrets growing up in it. I don't want to say no regrets, but I had a great upbringing. I don't feel negativity towards my upbringing because I was in the Mormon Church, other than some cases, which I've talked about before, and I'm not going to get into here. But this, when I say this is fairly universal, remember, I was born in Norway. My parents became members when I was a tiny kid there. I went back to Norway on a Mormon mission in the 80s. So I lived there, including my hometown of Stavanger. I was in for my I can never remember if it's last 4 or 5 months, but it was basically spring and summer of 84. And by probably a third of the way through my mission, I was a full-on native speaking Norwegian. I already spoke the language. I'm still pretty decent at the language as long as it's basic stuff. I cannot, get into deep conversations with people. I might understand them. I might not find the words to answer. But I have a Stavanger dialect. Hvis du hører meg snakke, så tror du jeg fra Stavanger. Basically, I'm saying if you hear me talk Norwegian, you'd think I was from Stavanger, which is where I'm from. Little branch there. It's gotten a little bit bigger over the years, but it's not like hundreds and hundreds of people. At least I don't believe it is. I think it's still fairly small. Part of the problem in Norway, and this is off the subject a little bit, but part of the problem is if you convert to Mormonism in Norway or a lot of countries where there just aren't very many members, it is very hard to stay active in the church, especially if you're younger, because there's nobody for you to date, or very few people for you to date. I've mentioned before, when I was done with my mission, I had a guy and a couple other people say, you need to come back. There's these girls here. There's no one for them to date. They would, they want to get married to a Mormon. I'm like, I'm 20. I'm not ready to get married. I'm going to go live my life a little bit now. But it's part of the reason so many people leave. But back to my point. I have lived in the Mormon church in Norway, in Canada, in Utah, in Idaho, and my wife is from California, and I've spent a ton of time in California. If you add it up, it's many, many years I've spent in California. This is not some isolated thing where, those of you that are pushing back, I don't believe I'm not calling you a liar. I just have a hard time believing that you've never heard that, unless it's changed and you're younger. If you're, say, 40 or over, I have a hard time believing you've never heard that pushed on parents. Leaders used to bring that up a lot, and I have not changed my opinion. I've read your comments. I appreciate them. I respect them. Has not changed my mind. I still think it's a very hurtful, harmful thing to teach people. Whether it's doctrine or not is irrelevant. Like I said, if enough people are pushing something in an organization, a religion, whatever, a sports team, whatever you have, if enough people are pushing it and saying it, like I said, de facto, it becomes part of that teaching. And there are a lot of things. In fact, I am going to write down a list of things within the LDS church that are not doctrine, specifically doctrine, but that are kind of widespread. I mentioned the word of wisdom thing. And by the way, I did a video on the word of wisdom, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, excuse me, talking about how that was not the reason I left the Mormon church. I've had people say, well, you just like beer, and so you don't want to be in the church. That's just not true. For one thing, I only have my beers on the weekend. I'm not justifying it. I don't need to justify it. I enjoy it. If I believed in the church, I wouldn't have any problem giving that up. I didn't drink for years and years and years because I was trying to be a good Mormon. When I was on a mission, even though I was not fully convinced, I lived it completely. I did not break the rules. The only rule I ever broke, and this is not bragging, it's just how my mind worked and how I was raised. It's like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. The only rule I ever broke was towards the end of my mission. It was in Stavanger. I was burned out, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was playing. And my companion and I went and saw it. We weren't supposed to go to movies. By the way, they edited it pretty heavily in Norway. I don't know if it's still like that, but the scene where he reaches into Indiana Jones. Well, he does it to somebody else. He pulls the guy's heart out, just with his mind. That got completely edited out. I didn't see that until years later when I watched it again. I don't know if Norway's still that sensitive when it comes to movies like that, but that was the only time that I remember breaking any rules. I lived it, and I studied my ass off. I read scriptures every morning. I can't remember if it was 45 minutes or an hour, but we did it every morning, and a lot of guys just slept. They didn't do squat. I actually did it. I read the Book of Mormon front to back, either 3 or 4 times. I don't remember. I read the Bible front to back, front to back, one time completely, and then I kind of went through it again a second time. It's not an easy book to read, by the way. It's not like reading a Louis L'Amour novel or a Harry Potter movie or something. It's the Book of Mormon was more interesting to me. Something that a lot of non-members, non-LDS people talk about is, oh, you push the Book of Mormon way too much. And I can only speak for myself. When we were on our mission, when we approached new people, we didn't start with the Book of Mormon. We started with Bible, because that's what people are familiar with. And we would introduce the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price. And if you don't know, everybody's heard of the Book of Mormon. If you don't know, the Pearl of Great Price and the Doctrine and Covenants are basically two other books that are part of Mormon scripture. By the way, just a side note, a lot of you probably heard of the Book of Mormon because of the Broadway play, which just, I haven't seen it. I won't go see it. Just makes fun of the Mormon religion. You know, freedom of speech, you get to do what you want, but it's funny how they pick and choose. There are certain religions you can't do that with. You'd be in, oh man, you'd be in trouble. But for some reason, there are certain religions. There's one I'm thinking of, I'm not even going to mention it, but you can persecute all you want and it's okay. You can make fun of Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or Seventh-day Adventists, but there are certain religions you're not allowed to. So I do stand up for the Mormon church a lot. Like, I'll be playing poker in Oklahoma City, and you know, conversations happen all the time. And somebody is, where are you from? Well, I'm from Norway, but I live in Utah. Oh, you must be Mormon. I'm like, well, I used to be. I'm not now. And there's all these misconceptions out there about the Mormon church. And I will always stand up for it, because I have very close family members, including my parents, that are very active in the church. I have a brother who's very active. And I think it's a good religion. It's, no matter what anybody says, it's based on Jesus Christ, not Joseph Smith. So I will stand up for it in most ways, but I had to come do this video because I don't agree with some of you that are pushing back and saying, well, it's not the doctrine. I get it. I understand. But like I said, you push something enough, it becomes, anyway, I already said what I was going to say. So feel free to comment back. I'm sure some of you will. And like I said, I don't mind the pushback. On this topic, you're not going to change my mind. And I'm going to work on coming up with a list of other things that are not doctrine, but are pushed. There, well, I'll tease this one. So, I have gay friends. Two of my best friends they're a gay couple. I love them both. They're good dudes. I have a friend who's an active LDS member, and when he lived in a town about 20 years ago, across the street from him, there was a lesbian couple. They were active Mormons, which that's a whole other topic. I don't get that. Why would you want to be part of a church where they tell you you're a sinner? What you believe, how you feel, who you love makes you a bad person. I don't get that. At BYU, I'll see protests. I live near BYU. Gays protesting, you know, the honor code and stuff. And I know I did a video on the honor code and I bitched a little bit about it. I get it. I signed it. I understand. But if I was gay, I would not go to BYU. I would not be Mormon. I don't want to be part of something they don't want me. Anyway, this couple lived across the street from him, and they were good friends with him. Nice ladies. When they would go in for their interviews, you know, for temple recommends and stuff like that, they would just say, well, we are in our heads, but we don't act on it, which, of course, I don't believe that either. I know plenty of people, I've known many people that go in for their temple recommend interview and just lie. You know, to each his own. I never saw the point of that either. Anyway, I'm starting to pontificate a little bit too much here. I will. That's something I want to talk about, though. I want to do a video about. I would love to get in the mind of somebody. I like these two particular friends. Neither is Mormon. One was raised Mormon, but they wouldn't be part of the church. Why would they? It's like, no, you're living a sinful life. I don't think they're living a sinful life. You know, love who you want to love. Be who you want to be. I I try really hard just to give people the benefit of the doubt. And if you're a good person, you're a good person. I don't care who you love, what you look like, where you're from. As long as you're nice to people, I say it all the time. If you treat people right, I don't care what you believe. If you hurt people, then I'm against you, period. If your religion is hurting people, I'm against you. Anyway, like I said, I'm sure I'm going to get some comments on this too, and I bring them on. I'm a big boy. I can take it. But I do appreciate you commenting, regardless of what you think of me or about me, or you know, you're only seeing me in a video. I do try to be a sincere. This is who I am. I don't try to put on airs. I don't try to pretend I'm somebody when I do my videos on here or TikTok or wherever. I don't put filters on. This is just old fart me. I'm a pretty happy guy, pretty positive guy. I have my moments just like anybody else, but I really try to live my life being happy and being grateful for the things I have. So one of the things I'm grateful for is y'all watching this. Thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful day. It's hump day. 2 more days. I get to head down to Vegas to visit with my son for a couple of days. Then it's back home and camping for the 4th of July with a whole bunch of friends. Rodeos, fireworks, the whole 9 yards. God bless America. Have a great day, everybody. Peace. Love. Oh, tack för den gång. Vi snackas igen snart.